Fantastic. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Cyber Judo. Tonight, Travis and myself are going to speak a little bit about leveling up our pen testing skills, most specifically when it comes to reporting and communications. But we're going to have the opportunity of also talking a little bit about the pen testing process from a network standpoint, also some elements of reconnaissance, some elements of reverse engineering thick client applications, some of the tools, some of the techniques and the processes that are involved in all of that. So we're really excited to not just show you guys a little bit about like our pen testing reports and how we go through our pen testing engagement here at Go Vanguard Security, but also provide you guys more resources and content to empower you guys, improve your skills, be it if you're just new and breaking into cybersecurity, or if you guys are already doing pen testing engagements and you're looking to kind of take it to the next level and differentiate yourself compared to other pen testers or compared to other firms. That being noted, one of the things I just want to generally disclose and note is that on our team here, we have myself, Christian Scott, we have Travis DeForge, and we also have Dennis Carlson. Now, while we here at Cyber Judo are just trying to provide good content and educate everybody in the domain of cybersecurity and information cybersecurity, the fact of the matter is that we have day jobs working at Go Vanguard. And I serve as our chief operating officer and chief information security officer. I used to, when this organization was wee small, do all the pen testing and the reporting and all that kind of stuff myself, right? As we've grown, we've had the opportunity of having fantastic and awesome folks like Travis join us and Dennis join us. And Travis is our security manager, helping ensure that we're having good processes and documentation in place and getting new folks up to speed and that kind of stuff. And Dennis is one of our senior security engineers who is really a fantastic expert at not just that, network stuff and the web app stuff, but also being able to really kind of dig into elements of APIs and mobile apps and all that kind of stuff and reverse engineer it. What we're doing here is leveraging some of our content from Go Vanguard Security, some of our redacted sample reports to help educate everybody. Our firm at the end of the day kind of operates on the principle of, I always want to encourage my competitors to provide the most valuable insight and deliverables to their own customers. So even though I know like fantastic folks like Michael Hallman, right? He just joined the Net SPI team, right? I'm so enthusiastic about that because Net SPI is one of the few firms that I have some respect for, because what they do is provide what I feel is pretty good insight to their customers at a pretty valuable price point, right? And so if I can have some of my competitors that are shitty competitors learn from me and do better, and they can put more value on their customers' plates and put more good into the world, I see that as a net benefit. Right? I want good competitors. And I also want to make sure that at the end of the day, it's a benefit to even myself and my team, because that helps protect, whatever is being pen tested, a bank, some web application, some social media thing. Those are things that we and our family members leverage and utilize, right? So ultimately, if there's more people in the domain of cybersecurity and more good companies that are hardworking and providing valuable insight, then it's a net benefit for the rest of the world in the community. That's how we see it, right? So that's why we're going to be leveraging some of our sample reports and content here tonight from the Go Vanguard security side of things. But this is not a sales pitch. I'm not looking for any type of shit. We're already really busy with a tons of fantastic sales engagements and project, all that. That being said, Travis, I want to pass over to you for one quick moment. Is there anything big I'm missing here?
Yeah, I think I'll say that a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about it's through the lens of pen testing, but it isn't pen tester specific. A lot of the aspects of how we're going to communicate, how we're going to present the information, how we're going to look at risk, how we're going to assess risk and prioritization, making the plans for all of that. That's just InfoSec in general. And a lot of those themes and techniques that we'll talk about when it comes to effectively communicating those things is going to be just as useful for you if you're on the incident response side trying to get your point across to executives, or if you're a pen tester trying to provide an engagement. So even if pen testing isn't particularly your thing, I think there'll be a lot of good takeaways from the discussion tonight.
Awesome. Also, Dennis, was there any additional elements you wanted to add that perhaps I missed out on?
I don't have anything right now, no. I
No,
appreciate it, but I don't have I don't have anything to add.
I just love putting people on the spot. You know how I go, man. So okay, cool. Then with that, I want to talk about just a couple initial components of the pen testing process and just setting the frame, right? So again, this is very much centric to reporting and communication skills, which means that it doesn't actually just start at building a report, but it actually starts all the way at the beginning. Now, we already had a session talking about pre-engagement penetration testing considerations, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but for some new folks who may not be aware of this content, right? Or some folks who are looking to kind of solidify, through, iterative process of, continuously looking at the same type of content. We have this here that really talks about some fundamental key components of, first and foremost here, who are you talking to and what's their objective? So just remember, anytime you are doing a pen test, what do they want? Are they looking for real insight into the security posture of their enterprise or their application? Or are they looking to check a compliance checkbox? Or is it sometimes, and I've seen this, political shit where somebody's just trying to write a hit piece on taking down a system? Or it's a political piece where somebody's trying to have the scope of systems being pen tested, like even though it's a company of like 500 people, they only want you to pen test 5 servers so that they get a really, really clean pen test report and everything looks absolutely perfect. And Travis, I think you've seen that before in the past, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 20, 30,000 employees look at like 68 IPs on the internal. Yeah, okay.
Totally legit. So that's just a really important element to remember, not just in the initial stages of, sales engagement and doing a kickoff for a pen test engagement, all that kind of stuff. But as you're going through it and you're writing a narrative, and I'm not necessarily certain if everyone's familiar with what a narrative is. We'll get into that in a moment, but that's a critical key component to our pen test reports. But as you're building a narrative in your pen test report, as you're writing the security findings, as you're providing recommendations, as you're writing out the conclusion, all that kind of stuff, it is important to have as a frame of reference in your mind of what are they looking for out of that particular report. Another element is just remember, as you're going through a pen test, what is the scope of the pen test? And for one reason or another, like Travis and I were just talking about, if it feels kind of funky where it's like a really large company, but they only gave you a small number of IPs or something like that, right? Like ask about it. Hey, this seems a little bit strange. I just want to clarify here. Or, hey, we did some reconnaissance on your subdomains and it seems like you have a lot more systems that are in scope. Is that correct? What's going on here? So just remember to have that in mind as you're starting to kick off a pen test, as you're going through the engagement, being very aware of that. And then also from a high level standpoint, the setting good customer expectations. Again, this starts right in the beginning. Before you even have a kickoff call, right? In the sales process, once you start to get into the kickoff, right? Of making sure that you're communicating who's doing what, when, right? What the communication cadence and schedule is going to be. Hey, you're getting status updates on a daily basis, a weekly basis, what the format's being of a meeting versus something that might just be an email or joining their Slack workspace, that kind of stuff. So those are just a couple things to remember, keep in mind. And then also, I always have to remind myself of this and go back to this, and some of our other teammates do, which is avoid low quality exploits that might affect a system, any type of load testing, any Hail Mary attacks, any extremely automated injection attacks and fuzzing on production systems, right? So make sure if someone's giving you a bunch of IPs or that kind of stuff, like what is that system? What does it do? How important is it for you, right? Web applications, APIs, mobile apps, those are in particular really, really important to not pen test production systems. And if their customers having you do that, you may want to educate them about like why that might be a poor form and idea to do that. Even if you're not intending on taking a system offline or quote unquote down, remember that if someone's asking you to pen test a production system, let's say an production web application, well, the thing is that you could generate through all of your SQL injection attacks against a set of forms, a bunch of garbage data, right? That could be really impactful to them and throw off their business intelligence, or it could be as simple as just a sign up form or a form for submitting tickets. And now some poor guy has to, go into a mailbox and clean it all out, or go into the ticketing system, and clean it all out, So just keep that in mind, be cognizant of that. If you're ever uncertain, ask. So I want to just, again, provide this as an initial resource and reference here. Travis, as I'm going through each one of these, would you be able to just drop in the hyperlink in the chat?
Yeah, I've been doing that.
Oh, stupendous. Look at that. You're awesome. Okay, cool. So that's one just initial resource for you guys. Again, I'm not going to deep dive into this, but there are tons of really good tidbits in here if you haven't seen it already. Next big one is writing a pen test report. Travis primarily spearheaded this guide, right? Of talking about how to structure a pen test report as you're kind of developing it holistically. Again, what's being tested, what dates, the objective of the test, all that kind of stuff's really, really important. If you're missing at what dates you're pen testing something, that could actually be really problematic, because maybe 2 weeks later they make a change to a production system, they push some new code that has a security regression in it, right? And then it gets hacked. That wouldn't be quite good, right? So that's why we want to make sure that we're specifying even those little tidbits there. What standards are being leveraged throughout the pen testing process and the methodology, that kind of stuff is really important. Risk details, the conclusion, we all know about that. You guys are going to get to see that in a real report that we have here in just a quick moment. Some tips for writing a really good report. Obviously, proofreading is super important. We're the type of firm where we have a multi-stage review process. So for ourselves, we'll usually have 1 or 2 cybersecurity engineers working on a particular engagement. After they complete that, they have some outside cybersecurity engineer review their work. So what we call technical bullshit checking, right? Hey, you took a look at this and you saw that? Well, did you dive even further? Well, did you try this type of exploit? Well, wait, that doesn't look like you did that SQL injection attack correctly. Try it again like this, right? That's always really important, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of people in the industry who kind of gloat and always represent themselves as experts. And really, at the end of the day, there is no such thing as an expert. As the island of knowledge expands, so does our shores of ignorance, right? So it's important to always have other engineers bullshit check us and be challenging and provide feedback. That's how we learn and grow. And sometimes in that process, we can find out a lot of cool things like, oh, wait, there's this other cool tool, or there's this other cool technique. This is how I could have improved this thing. So that's one of the reasons why our first level of review is another cybersecurity engineer, right? Then right after that, we'll have our governance, risk, and compliance team review that. And the reason being is that they have a frame of reference of, well, holistically, what's an information security program? How do you perform risk management? What risks are acceptable? Which ones aren't? And not to mention, they also usually have a pretty good eye for detail when it comes to language, right? And how well written it is, the grammatical structure, and that kind of stuff. And then also making sure that it reads well enough to an executive as well. At the end of the day, if you have a report with a conclusion and an introduction and a summary that is completely filled with jargon, that may be unproductive to communicating what is the outcome and action items of that pen testing report, right? So we have the GRC team review it. And then lastly, it goes to the leadership team. So usually that would be Blake and myself on our team, and we triple check it, make sure it's thorough, try to provide feedback and be challenging to the team on where they can improve on things. And sometimes things need to get corrected and sometimes they don't, right? But that is just really, really extremely important there. Take the time to write professionally. Again, that goes back to, if you're starting to speak about something that has technical jargon, define what it is initially at first, especially like acronyms that might be a little bit specific. And then on top of that, make sure that as you're writing a report, that you're focusing on not just the vulnerabilities and weaknesses, but what's the realistic impact to the organization? If a threat actor was going to realize that attack and be exploiting those vulnerabilities and weaknesses that you just identified, what does that really mean to them? What should they really do about it? How should they prioritize the remediation of those various risks? So that being noted, what we're going to do here for you guys is we're going to start jumping into our pen testing report here. And Travis, I just want to confirm, Can you guys see this one? All right.
Yeah. Looks good.
Okay. Fantastic. So we have an example pen testing report for you guys. We're going to talk a little bit about what we do and what we leverage. You work for another cybersecurity firm and a competing firm. Feel free to take this as a learning opportunity if there's something that you can learn from it. And hell, if you got a tip from me and we're doing something wrong, right? Feel free to let us know. Again, we're open to sharing and collaborating with folks. So that being said, as you guys can see here, this is a report that's not just about network penetration testing, which is fairly conventional. And I'm sure a lot of you folks have seen conventional network pen testing reports, but also for an application, not just any type of application, a thick client application. Web apps, web apps are, they're more complex. They're above network pen testing, so are APIs and mobile apps, but thick client stuff, that's a whole different league in itself. Very interesting, right? And depending on what it was compiled for and what platform, what it functionally does, because that requires a certain level of expertise of a security engineer having the ability to reverse engineer, decompile, deconstruct an application, right? And sometimes even tamper with an application while it is running in memory. So it's again leveraging different skill sets and different types of knowledge than a conventional web app pen tester or a conventional network pen tester, right? So that being noted, the initial component of our report here and the framing of the report, I'll just note that this is a 43-page report. This is a very large application that was pen tested, a very large complex network and ecosystem that was pen tested for an organization that exceeds in the range of billions of dollars. So when I was a youngin and I was first writing pen test reports, I always thought that bigger was better. And what I figured out the hard way that bigger is not better, and that it can be very taxing on people's eyeballs if you have a pen testing report that's 100 pages long, 120 pages long, 150 pages long. I put some of those out in the past and actually been a little bit embarrassed about it because it's too long to read, And so if it is going to be long, and this is 43 pages, it's about in the territory of starting to get long nowadays for our organization, right? It has to be jam-packed with a lot of insight and details, and it's helpful, and it's going to be engaging to the reader, right? Which means it should probably also have complementary illustrations to take something that's a really complex topic and break it down, particularly for application folks, as well as for executives and project managers, as well as maybe folks who are not necessarily pen testers, but they have to manage maybe the general risk treatment strategy and program for the organization, right? So that's why we have a lot of accompanying illustrations here. As we were noting previously, referencing the standards is important and all that kind of stuff, which is what you see here, right? This is where things start to get a bit prettier, right? Where we break down like our network pen testing strategy and are just really simple diagram, right? Like, yes, you could have it written out in a billion like bullet points of what your phases for a network pen test is. That's great. You can do that. It's written out in PTES, the penetration testing execution standard. But when you show somebody a cool diagram that lists off the tools real quick for them, like you start to educate executives and they feel like they get it too, and that's really important because when someone feels like they're learning and they're being able to catch up and grow, right, that makes them more invested in the process, right? One of the things that's really important for us in our pen testing reports is we focus a lot of times on this one page talking about risk scoring. So many misunderstandings can occur if you incorrectly gauge the severity or risk rating of a particular security finance in your report. So you really need to be thoughtful about it and explain the rationale behind it. Piss poor thing I learned right from the get-go was do not use CVSS scores. Why? Well, CVSS 10 is bad, isn't it? Yeah, but CVSS 10 on a HP printer compared to a CVSS score on a Windows file server that processes confidential data are different things, aren't they? They're both CVSS 10. You see how it's not very helpful to use CVSS 10 as that's a high risk item. So what we try to do as a firm, this is not perfect by any means, and we're looking to iteratively improve this, right? But as a magnitude of impact, ease of exploitation, put that into a matrix. That's how you get a severity or a risk amount. Magnitude of impact. Do we break into a printer or did we break into a server that has confidential data in it? Those are very different things, right? If you have in a report when you're conducting a pen test, you broke into a printer and that's a high severity thing, you might want to reconsider having it in a report that way, right? You're making mountains out of molehills. It's not going to be helpful, right? And sometimes that will make the customer and the IT team on the other side a little bit adversarial, right? That you're being pedantic and pissing all over their infrastructure. Like they're like, well, what about all the other servers? What about all the other shit, right? You're going to ding me for a high severity of one printer, right? That had default credentials on it. Are you serious? You know, another thing, by the way, that I learned the hard way is do not ever connotate the entirety severity score for an organization of we consider your organization to be a high or a moderate risk or whatever, right? Especially if the only reason why it's like the weakest link, thought process, especially if it's because it was just one printer that had default credentials on it. That's going to really frustrate somebody. There's nothing like having an environment of 90,000 systems, right? And out of those 90,000 systems, only 5 of them had problems with them. And then somebody says that you're a high risk, right? There has to be a sense of relativism and size and scale to things. So the magnitude of impact helps a little bit with that. Ease of exploitation as well, which is essentially like your likelihood, right? The way we try to leverage it and think about it is the likelihood of that leading to a complete kill chain and gaining access to a system. Not a likelihood of, oh, hey, I can perform, I can take something and, for example, you have no X-frame options header on your website. I can perform a clickjacking attack on a regular user. Okay, but how much does that really lead to the entire kill chain or compromise of an entire user or an entire set of systems? Unless you're ready to prove it, I would not put that as a high, my man, right? So things that are readily exploitable with open source scripts, automated tools and whatnot, leveraging very little pen testing skill sets, right? Those things are going to be more high, right? Where you have for example, an application that takes many, many hours to decompile and reverse engineer, and then you happen to find that there's a hard-coded secret, the ease on that's going to be more like a moderate, because you want to know what? Most malicious actors are not going to take 10, 12, 15 hours to decompile an application to find this little credential, right? They're going to move on to other stuff, other low-hanging fruit. So you put that in a chart against one another. That's how you get that level of risk there. So take the opportunity to really explain that to your customers and make sure that they understand that it's set with a good set of reference, because they're going to utilize those, by the way, they're going to utilize those as their priorities, right? So if you talk about printers being like open all day long, and then there's other things that are actually more important that are a lower risk item for some reason or another, right? That's problematic. We always like to provide keys to people, just like, hey, this is what you should be anticipating seeing in a report and how we break things out. One of the things that we're a little bit different as an organization that I don't see in a lot of my competitors' pen testing reports is we say the risk status for something. So a security finding will say if it's detected, like, hey, I detected it, but I didn't exploit it, or I did a proof of concept exploit or attack against it, right? Or I actually exploited it. Sometimes there'll be actually things that we have in a report where there'll be a vulnerability or weakness that we didn't exploit because we just didn't have time. There was other shit that we were exploiting, that we were setting on fire the entire time. And we detected that there was all these other vulnerabilities and weaknesses, but it's like, I don't have time for that. I'm in a time-bound engagement of 2 to 4 weeks here, or it's something that's just detected, but you can't really do much with, like, again, cross-site scripting, header, that kind of stuff. We also, when we detect something, we provide a QOD, quality of detection. That's confidence scoring. I always recommend having something like that in your reports. The reason being is it provides a little bit of CYA for yourself, right? Also make sure your customers aren't chasing after ghosts, right? Because there is nothing more embarrassing than you saying, this is a security finding and this is a particular vulnerability or weakness. And they go, no, it isn't. And here's the evidence of why. And then you're like, oh, well, I guess I got that one a little bit wrong there. So when you put the confidence to something of like, hey, I used Nmap to fingerprint something, and Nmap was telling me that this is Windows Server 2008. And, there's a lot of problems, obviously, with that being super out of date and the tons of vulnerabilities and weaknesses against it. But Nmap sometimes can be a little bit of shoddy in fingerprinting things. So our QOD is 60% on that one. That's really helpful. Then they know, oh, you know what? It's not Windows Server 2008. It's Windows Server 2008 ARC2, or 2012. And for some reason, you got fingerprinted incorrectly by Nmap, which happens all the time. Important tip, just cutting myself off here. Never trust one singular tool to tell you something and to give you insights. It will fuck you over every time. And by the way, speaking of Nmap stuff, Travis did a fantastic guide, if you guys haven't seen it already, on advanced Nmap techniques. So be sure to take a look at that. That has a lot of fantastic insight there. Just because sometimes you get false positives out of it doesn't mean it's not a great tool. It's an absolutely fantastic tool. So continuing on here, then we just tell people what to essentially expect in the next, after they see that title bar there of, hey, this is the evidence that we provide in our risk detection results. We have a risk body that concludes things like, what's the summary, references, risk remediation recommendations, that kind of stuff. Take the opportunity, by the way, when you are writing a report, think about the system that you're pen testing and then the vulnerability or weakness that was just found or detected, and try to curate your recommendations. There's nothing more frustrating to a fucking IT person getting a bland and ambiguous recommendation. For example, you don't have an X-Frame options header on your website, so you should implement an X-Frame options header for your website. Oh, really now? Well, you just told me the inverse of the problem. That's not very helpful. You know what's a lot more helpful? Hey, I see that your website's a WordPress hosted website. WordFence is a fantastic plugin that will help you implement some of these security features that you're missing on your website. And it's 3 clicks. Well, there you go. Now the IT team doesn't have to guess what you mean. They can just do it real quickly, which means that the process of remediation, that burn down and the time to remediation is much faster. You know what really matters when you're doing a web app pen test? Especially if you're doing a web app pen test on a application that is generating revenue for a business or is a mission critical web application, if you give them recommendations that allows them to remediate the issues faster, that means that they're able to push it to the market faster, which means they're able to make money faster. That's what executives want to see, right? So when you provide granular remediation recommendations like that, it'll build a lot of good relationships amongst the IT team and executive management. So,
and you'll get a lot less questions lobbed at you.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than having something broad on there, then they ask you for that specific syntax you need in the Nginx config file on the spy. Like, I don't know. I gotta look that up for you. But if you have it all in there, you have some really rock solid references that you can point them to. A lot of times it'll go a lot smoother come presentation day.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. There's nothing worse than having all the back and forth where it's you trying to prove something, or they don't quite understand what you were intending to explain to them or infer to them. That can be problematic. We by the way, that will happen to everybody here. It's happened to me 100 times. So when you have that happen, just remain calm and collected and try to best, explain something out and be collaborative in the process, not defensive and antagonistic, right? It's not going to get you anywhere. So it seems like these sometimes might be simple tips for folks, but also at the end of the day, it's easy to forget. And also a lot of IT folks can kind of like have a chip on their shoulder of proving something, improving their knowledge. I would say practicing humility will get you a lot farther than having that chip on your shoulder and being a know-it-all. That comes from my own practical experience, unfortunately. So by the way,
don't be like me and hold a vendetta against them.
By the way, this I'm just going to go back here just one quick second. This is still not perfect, right? So some things that we're implementing into our new reports for the future is like a MITRE tactic reference, right? And then also the impact to type. So for example, a clickjacking attack is an impact to the user of the web application, not the underlying server infrastructure, right? So those would be things that I would typically recommend to somebody. We haven't done it quite yet because we're still refining our processes, right? Just like any organization, we try to iteratively improve, but I would just give you those additional tips. So that being noted, we have our initial scorecard. It's all right. I would like better. Again, you take it, you lose it, but always giving someone a high level count and then the top security risk items to focus on, I think is always helpful and important. A lot of organizations or a lot of other pen testing firms, what they'll do is the count of risks is the count of affected systems with a risk. We do essentially a singular risk item that may be a group of actual vulnerabilities and weaknesses associated to one another for a group of systems. It boils it down and it makes it a little bit less noisy and understandable for somebody. For example, in a pen testing report, let's say you go to run OpenVOS, right? And then you take your OpenVOS scan and you import it into a tool like Dratus, which helps you produce a pen testing report, right? And it finds that there's an old PHP website. And so you got basically 30 items about how PHP is fucking old and all the different remote code execution and denial of service attacks that can be performed against it and whatnot. If you produce a report with 30 items to talk about PHP being out of date all day long and in all the different ways you can fuck it over, how's that helpful to the customer? It's the same action item of go update PHP on those two systems. You don't need 15 pages to illustrate a point in that. It's just going to create a bunch of noise and it's unhelpful to somebody, right? So we take the opportunity where when there's a lot of aggregate risks and vulnerabilities and weaknesses that are associated with one another that are really kind of resolved by the same action item or the same remediation steps and process, we aggregate it together in the same security finding. This way, it's a lot more digestible and understandable to the customer, right? And then this here is focusing on the thick client of specific version numbers and all that kind of stuff. Again, if you're ever pen testing a web application, a thick client application, mobile application, make sure you note specific version numbers that you're seeing, right? And the specific date and times, because I will tell you what, they will not pause and freeze for your pen tests. As much as your firm may say, hey, during this pen test, you should freeze all development activities. They ain't got time for that shit, and they're not going to listen to you, right? So make sure you write down the version numbers and the dates. This way, when someone says, well, I don't see that anymore. Well, that's because you changed it since. Okay, that's why. Or, oh, hey, well, we had this other vulnerability. Why did you report on that? It's because you implemented that regression accidentally 2 weeks after we did our pen test. That being noted, Travis, did you have any additional elements?
Not on that. Zachariah just asked, was this a black box test? I don't remember if this one was black or gray.
Yeah, this is a completely black box penetration testing engagement here. So even the thick client application, it's essentially from the viewpoint of us compromising. Actually, you know what? Whoa, holy shit. Here, this is a perfect illustration. This is a malicious actor initially compromising a workstation or a server that's on the network. So we're starting from a Kali Linux, essentially virtual machine that they provision for us, our customer, right? On a regular workstation VLAN and subnet. Okay, go have at it, guys, right? And so what we did is through our lateral movement was then able to find the thick client application and all the systems architecture associated with it. So the database servers, the web servers, you know, all file servers that were associated with that application in its ecosystem, and then start exploiting those. So the thick client application that we pen tested in this engagement was all done from a black box standpoint. It was like as if we were a real malicious actor who happened to stumble across a compromised workstation. It's like, oh, this is already installed here. Well, let me reverse engineer it a little bit, right? Let me decompile it. And oh, there's some interesting things after we decompile. So we took the opportunity for this customer, and we do this for a lot of our larger customers with more complex environments and ecosystems, to really try to break down, okay, here's the starting point of a bad guy, right? And this is what we're able to do in the process. And you can see we label every specific security finding and where that interfaced in the kill chain, right? So, hey, we happen to find that there's net BIOS and link local multicast name resolution traffic that we were able to poison. Through that process, I was able to capture 133 Windows user credentials in your Active Directory environment. 133, wowee. Okay, well, from there, I can pass that via SMB signing, right, to any of your servers and your systems and just get Active Directory domain admin access. In this particular circumstance, we did not do that by default because in our rules of engagement with that specific customer, we told them we weren't going to do that because it would create complete panic. This is a very large, complex enterprise. So even doing that type of thing would cause them to kind of freak out, right? But we were able to illustrate that quite well. Then beyond that, once we had that initial compromised workstation, we were able to decompile their thick client application, right? Reverse engineer it. And in that process, find that there's tons of hard-coded credentials in the configuration file that the application references to. Mike, I'll tell you what, not even a sophisticated malicious actor needs to do this, right? You could actually, as a malicious actor, just see the config file that's right next to the executable file and then open it up and see credentials that were listed out and then go, oh, wait, it looks like they're just like roughly ciphered or encrypted here. Let me go figure that out, right? And then from there, what we are able to do is once we launched it up and we're just kind of working with it a little bit more, We had Wireshark running on the system. Oh, when it goes to connect to the database, though, oh, it's all submitted in plain text. So all those credentials that were encrypted in the config file and all that kind of stuff anyways, oh, they're sent plain text over the entire network, across the entire enterprise for every single employee within this entire enterprise that's of greater than 10,000 users. Wowee, that's not great. That's not fantastic at all, right? And then going from there of leveraging those weak credentials to gain direct access to their MS SQL server, and their MS SQL server, even better yet, had XP command shell enabled on it. This is usually a really old thing to find in an environment, so it's not like a frequent one. I see Michael Hallman here; he's like lighting up, right? Because it's like one of those things where you might see like in a lab, right? Like Metasploitable, but you would never see it in reality because it's just too ancient. It's too weird and really, really, insecure. But they did, right? And then obviously at that point in juncture, we can compromise the rest of the entire MS SQL, not just server, but their cluster, right? And grab the entire database. And, oh, yeah, that's right. By the way, just by looking at the application and reverse engineering it, it had all these UNC paths in it. So looking at those Windows file shares, we gotta take a look at them. Oh, wow, everybody, anyone who's in Active Directory could just access all these file shares. Oh, and by the way, we were able to get access to the full database backups as just a regular employee, just as a regular standard user anyways, right? So what you guys are noticing here is we're illustrating multiple ways and multiple kill chains to get to the same essentially end goal of a malicious actor of performing data exfiltration, gaining persistence, and then crypto locking an environment and committing a ransomware attack, right? That's this breakdown here. So that being said, continuing a little bit further, I hit on narrative very briefly, and I didn't really explain it for you guys. One of the things we love doing is this. If you give somebody a pen testing report with a bunch of security findings, and it's a 10-page report, the thing is you're not really proving what you're doing. You're not showing your homework. So it's kind of like my mom beating me over the head with a ruler when I was young, when I was doing my math homework. And like, you got to show the homework though. Stop putting the answers down. So that's a really important element for us because you are going to encounter some customers that have a really solid security posture. And when they have a really solid security posture, if you have no security findings to show or demonstrate, you end up with a 5-page report that says, yep, it's pretty good. Trust me on it. And the problem with that is while the customer might be getting a checkbox that they enjoy and that they like from a compliance standpoint or whatever, you're not demonstrating the value, right, of your work. You're not showing all of the time and energy that went into identifying what the attack surface was, looking at the vulnerabilities and weaknesses there, trying to triage it, and then, throwing everything you had exploitation wise at that particular system or environment or whatever. So we tend to write out narratives, which is basically a stream of consciousness as if we are a malicious actor, right? And which, there's the starting point of performing your open source intelligence gathering and reconnaissance and looking at the scope of systems and what ports and services are there. And then you identify various vulnerabilities and CVEs, and then you start to exploit them. And then you gain a foothold into a system. And then you start to perform various, persistence and lateral movement. We like to go through it that kind of stream of consciousness style because it's captivating for, believe it or not, for a lot of executives. They almost feel like they're watching that. What's a hacker show that everybody loves, Travis? It's like on HBO or something like that. It was really popular back in the day. Don't tell me no one knows it.
I can picture it. Oh, yes.
Somebody's Mr.
Robot.
Robot.
Yeah.
Mr. Robot. Well, how can I miss that one? By the way, I've never watched Mr. Robot, so that sounds like it's something that's probably on my bucket list here.
Oh, it's quite good. You should.
Okay, good. So, believe it or not, it's very captivating to a lot of executives because they feel like it's a little bit like Mr. Robot, and it allows them to educate themselves and understanding more about the security process, right? What a malicious actor can do to their environment. And every time you can break something down and educate anybody, that's going to encourage them to be a better champion for whatever your cause is. So that is particularly important. Demonstrating, again, your hard work, the amount of hours that went into the engagement, I think is important. And then also it's really helpful for the blue team and the IT department because they know exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it, and then they can replicate those steps. It like at the end of the day, I've had it where I've taught, man, several tens of IT departments and blue teams about how to do a pen test on their own time and their own thing and whatnot, right? And it's like, hey, here you go. Like I don't need to sell you every single little pen test, right? You come to me when you're looking for a quality pen test that's always done the right way to a T, and you're looking for a fantastic deliverable, right? But it's not some secret sauce, right? It's not some proprietary knowledge here. I'll teach you. So we really kind of pride ourselves in that process of educating somebody, right? And so what you guys can kind of see here is, we're using, by the way, Legion in this screenshot here. Legion is an open source tool featured in Kali Linux. My brother Shane, he maintains it. It's a fork of the old Sparta application that was Python 2.7. It's upgraded Python 3. Pretty good, fairly helpful, mostly for internal pen testing engagements, that kind of stuff. But again, just calling that out there. So
recently, if you haven't used Legion in a while or used a couple years ago and came back, a lot of new upgrades. There's actually a push button obfuscation method now, which uses some of the obfuscation scripts that I presented in the Nmap presentation a couple weeks back. And there's a bunch of custom configs that you can load into Nmap so that you can tailor down instead of scanning all 65,000 ports. You can be a little bit sneakier with it too. So there are a lot of new cool features if you haven't touched it in a while.
I think, Travis, one of the sessions that we were talking about doing in the future was tools of the trade. That sounds like Legion will be one of those.
Sure
That
will.
like secret scanner. They'll be fantastic. So everyone stay tuned for that part 2. So that being noted, so you can see us leveraging Legion, then we're leveraging Wireshark. Oh, we see all this NetBIOS traffic. Okay, well, let's poison that traffic. Oh, we're poisoning that traffic. And oh, look, we're capturing all these credentials. And now we're cracking them with Hashcat in our word lists. Okay, so now we got all these credentials and we can break into the environment. And oh, now we're also going to reverse engineer this application. Okay, in the process of reverse engineering this application, what types of interesting things can we find? Oh, Windows file shares, and everyone has access to it. Everyone has access to the backups. That's great. That's fantastic. So every step of the way, we try to, again, break down visually what we're doing here with the evidence, unquestionable. You guys can see, again, we blurred a megaton of this out here to make sure that whoever's environment this actually is, that kind of stuff is not, it's not known. Also, they've improved significantly since anyways. This is a little bit of one of our older reports here. And then this is a screenshot. You can actually tell this. Anyone who's like a database administrator or who's worked in like MS SQL knows that this is the MS SQL Studio console, and us just kind of poking around the databases and all that kind of stuff, just like a real malicious actor, and us running MS SQL statement queries against the database to pull lists of users and all that kind of stuff. So even when it's blurred, if you're an IT person and you've worked with those tools before, you're like, oh, I know that one. So after the narrative, and by the way, as you guys can see, we take the opportunity, like having the screenshots sometimes when you're communicating a lot of information, having them overlap in like a certain artistic way where it's like, oh, from this thing to this thing to that thing. If it's always just a bunch of centered images that are, especially if they're poorly cropped and you can't read the text, that's not very helpful to somebody. So quick pro tips that I have to sometimes remind my team about, understandably so, and I have to remind myself about when I have to work on a report every now and then, is if you have a screenshot you're putting in a report and you can't see the text at 100% regular magnification, what the fuck are you communicating? You're not communicating anything insightful. They're not going to be able to see it. Crop it down correctly so that it's demonstrating what you're looking for, right? Even if that means you're cutting off some of the gobbledygook of like, maybe there's like a really long curl command and then there's the result on the next line, right? You can cut off a little bit of the extra gobbledygook with the curl command and focus to the result. And then if you want, in the security finding or in the appendix, right, provide them the full curl query, right, or curl command to leverage and utilize to replicate that particular exploit or whatever, right? So that's something important. Also, when you're taking your screenshots, so we take all of our screenshots in real time. We are not ever pulling any customer data to our own systems. All this here, this is on all of their environment, right? In our virtual machine over there. I did not pull any database queries in my own systems. I did not grab any other files or any even pictures. None. I don't want any of that shit. That's a liability. That is a risk. That is a problem, right? Screenshot some good examples, right? Try not to make it personal, right? Which means if you're gonna be, don't find the CEO's passport, right? And then put his fucking face center stage in the report, right? It's gonna probably piss him off just a little bit, right? That you're trying to prove a point. Don't do that, right? Maybe a screenshot of his, my documents directory that lists the passport. There you go. That's a little bit better, right? Nobody wants to see their own face in a report, not unless you're really trying to scare somebody, right? Another important thing is redact secrets. A lot of times I've seen people like screenshotting reports, and I've seen a lot of pen testing firms do this shit. It's really gross. They're like, we broke into all these accounts and here's all the users' passwords. It's like, so then whoever reads this report knows those users' passwords and what they've used in the past. And like, it's obvious some of these users iterate their password by just an integer, right? Like, that's a terrible fucking idea. Why would you ever do that? And better yet, I'll have one of my customers send me one of my, a past competitor's pen test. Like, yeah, we want to go with you guys because you guys do obviously a fantastic job. Here's our competitors, the past pen test that we had done. Not even realizing that they're sending me a document with past employees' credentials in it. Not very good. That's not very thoughtful. Don't put any secrets. 0 passwords in your reports. Redact them. Redact out the center, right? I don't even like to list full email addresses, okay, unless I really have to, right? Redact out the center column of like the last name or something like that, or part of it where it's like you can show like maybe a little bit of the first name, that kind of stuff. But try not to, again, have long lists of personally identifiable information, any passwords, secrets. Secrets can still be things like, API keys, right? Don't put those directly in a report and then some bad guy picks it up later or somebody sees it later. No, just blur it out, man. Just blur it out or, redact it or something like that. It's gross. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to your customers. So after that, that's where we have the security findings section. So let me just scroll down to here. So if we take a look at this, okay, here we go. Weak DBO user credentials utilized. Again, we show the evidence of what we did. It's all redacted, obviously, here. Even the actual credentials in the example are redacted in red, right? So we're just showing the examples of us like leveraging it and utilizing it, and then providing very specific recommendations and breakdowns to them and the specific affected endpoints, all that kind of stuff, right? Overly permissibly MS SQL access within a particular application. So this is what's something that's kind of a little quirky sometimes. When you break into a system and then you break into more systems, you're going to keep finding more vulnerabilities and weaknesses to leverage. A simple one is this. You're performing a network pen test. You happen to find that there's a Cisco Catalyst switch that has Smart Install enabled on it. Through exploiting the Smart Install vulnerability, you're able to download the entire configuration file of that Cisco Catalyst switch. You happen to previously have some Cisco knowledge because you did some of the free Cisco courses, or maybe you're a CCNA, or maybe you have a network a plus cert or something like that. So you can read a little bit of the config. Well, when you read a little bit of the config, you take a look at it, and what you realize is that they hard-coded in a read-write SNMP community that's actually quite guessable, right? Or what you happen to see is that when reading through that configuration file of the Cisco Catalyst switch, that there is no degree of network and VLAN segregation occurring. You just identified additional vulnerabilities and weaknesses that were not apparent from your previous state before having access to the switch. What we try to do is, as we're gaining more knowledge and information, and now we're starting to kind of get to that gray box area, because usually a malicious actor doesn't have this knowledge about the database, but we're able to really kind of penetrate through the systems, work through it. As you do that, I would highly recommend documenting other security vulnerabilities and weaknesses that you happen to identify to the best of your knowledge, right? That's going to be very helpful in having them improve their defense in depth architecture. If you just tell everybody all day long about what the surface vulnerabilities and weaknesses are and how to patch those up, once a bad guy happens to exploit one of those or break through one of those, right? The rest of it, I always like to use the analogy, it's like a Ferrero Rocher chocolate. The Ferrero Rocher chocolates, it's those hazelnut chocolates are really, really delicious. They got a crunchy outside there, but then once you bite into them, they got that soft nougat center, right? We don't want to have our customers have a defense in depth posture that is like a Ferrero Rocher chocolate. So as you are breaking into an environment and a set of systems, if you identify additional vulnerabilities and weaknesses, be sure to document them as thoroughly as possible. Be sure to provide very specific remediation recommendations. This way, they can iteratively improve every single layer of their server and network infrastructure and virtualization environment, so on and so forth. Okay. It does make it a little bit challenging when you go to do a retest, though, and maybe a customer will improve something that then kind of makes it difficult to have visibility into if they fix the other things. If that happens, usually my recommendation is, for example, previously you saw that there was Windows file shares that had piss poor Active Directory permissions on them. Now you come back, you do a retest, they have network segregation implemented, so you can't even access the file shares in the first place. So how do you tell them if that previous vulnerability about Windows file shares being overly permissive is still outstanding or was actually remediated? You really can't. So you have two options. You can either say, hey, it's an NA, not applicable, because I just don't know. I didn't get far enough to tell you about that. Or two, you can try to be a nice dude and just watch out about scope creep and that kind of stuff. You can say, hey, listen, can you provide me evidence of that, right? Or can I get some type of white box access to the environment and I can go validate that? So I got to get past this ACL network segregation hurdle first and go validate that for you. If you take either approach, just make sure you communicate it clearly to the customer. Don't ever have it when you can't identify if something was remediated or not, and then you say, yeah, it's no longer outstanding. You're giving them the impression that they fix it when you really don't know if it was fixed or not. You just couldn't get to that level to identify if it was fixed, right? So just a small, important little point there. So Travis, I just want to stop for a quick moment and pause. Any big questions or any big items that I'm missing?
Dennis and I have been going through questions in the chat. So
Yeah.
nothing for you.
Feeling those out. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So then continuing on, a lot of our security findings are essentially broken out in the same way and mechanism. So I'm not going to beat a dead horse, especially because we're tight on time here. We have our conclusion at the end, which is for the most part, a fairly dry conclusion, right? Trying to summarize, hey, this is what we were able to do within the time frame allotted, right? This is the amount of the kill chain that we could accomplish. This is what a real malicious actor can do to impact the environment and rip it apart. And also, you can see here, we said the application and environment is considered to be high risk, not the entirety of the organization. That being said, I still, even to this day, this is a report that was produced by us about a year ago. I like to be very tactful about when you apply large labels to things. In this particular case, I applied a large label to it because we collected 133 user credentials, got Active Directory domain admin access, ripped apart the thick client application. And in that process, this thick client application, it was a ERP application, enterprise resource planning, which is basically the lifeblood and soul of a large enterprise. And when we were able to get access to it, we're able to, because it does all the authorization controls in the client-side code base, we're able to gain access to the CEO's account and impersonate the CEO, right? So this was a pretty big one, right? So using the term high risk here was quite merited. But you talk all day long about these individual recommendations, that kind of stuff, but it doesn't necessarily holistically give someone a game plan and a roadmap to success. This is a customer that is probably one of my top 3 favorite customers to work with. Their engineering team is absolutely awesome and very considerate and easygoing and fun. They're very knowledgeable in their domains and they sincerely care about their security posture. So I want to make sure that we went above and beyond, not just saying, hey, here's every little remediation recommendation, but that we give them an architecture and a roadmap for success. I previously have a background in initially when I was young, software development. And then as I got older, network and server infrastructure, right? And I previously also was I worked in the health information technology field as a enterprise or a electronic medical record architect. So I built a lot of these hospital systems that process, patient charts and records, all that kind of stuff. So I'm fairly familiar with architectures that are similar to ERPs. And so what we did is we built them out a diagram. Hey, listen, your application looks like this today, and there's all these vulnerabilities and incongruities and weaknesses here that a malicious actor is going to be able to exploit in all these different manners. And it's because you have architecturally some massive vulnerabilities that are based and predicated on a basically 90s mindset rather than implementing some modern security principles. So some things that you can do. First off, this is essentially this fat client application. It's a .NET thin client that then kind of calls back to like a launcher. But anyways, well, first off, what you can do is be fairly practical. Why don't we implement some web application firewalls, right? Why don't we implement some real intrusion prevention systems, right? That are between the workstations and the underlying server infrastructure environment, right? That's a good practical starting point. Next is, why don't we build out, rather than having a thick client that communicates directly against a database server, an MS SQL database server? That's a terrible idea. Why would you have every single employee in your organization interacting with a production database that is the lifeblood of your organization? Bad idea, not cool beans, right? Okay, let's set up a middleware, right? Where we have a web application VLAN. They'll host a publishing server, right? For our app that gets launched, a middleware RESTful API to make sure that you're not reliant on your client-side code and you have something to bullshit check everything before it hits the database. So there's some level of server-side validation and authorization checking, right? And then we'll have our reporting servers also segregated out rather than somebody, again, hitting directly to an MS SQL server and then generating reports on the workstation, eating workstation resources up and taking forever, right? Bad idea. So we'll do that. And then what we'll do is put your Active Directory stuff into its own VLAN, put your file server stuff into its own VLAN, and your database stuff into its own VLAN, because they're basically putting things in a really, really, really large VLANs and subnets, which is quite problematic because if you guys are not particularly familiar, even if you do not have access control lists between different VLANs and subnets, it's still really helpful because in between is a firewall that very frequently will have at least intrusion prevention or intrusion detection systems on it. So every time somebody is making a request, right, from, workstation 1 to file server A, it has to go through a firewall and be inter-VLAN routed, and that traffic has to be inspected. That provides the opportunity for logging that event and that communication and the opportunity of detecting potentially malicious behavior. If you have two systems, workstation 1 and file server A, that are on the same VLAN and subnet, you could have the most powerful firewall in the world, and intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, they talk directly to one another. So you're not going to be able to log that event very well from at least a network standpoint, or detect it very well from at least a network standpoint. So even the principle of having different things in different VLANs segregated out, even if the ACLs are completely open regardless, is way, way, way better than having everything on one big ass network. So that being noted, Travis, I'm certain that there's a couple of elements I'm missing here that you probably want to add in, and probably a couple additional questions. Is that right?
Oh, if there's any more questions that come through, please put them in the chat. We'll address them in the last couple of minutes here, or even stay a couple minutes after if there are any people want to stick around for another question that maybe just they don't want to put out to the whole group. But I'll say like writing technical writing or presenting in any way, whether it's something that you've done a million times or something new, it is a whole skill in itself, and you don't build it the same way that you do when you're studying pen testing. I did a lot of presenting when I was in the military and intelligence, and that presenting an intelligence briefing to the VIPs or the commanders and all that thing, it has a lot of similarities, but it's also in no way similar, right? The audience is different, what they care about is different, and it's really, really challenging to be able to portray the confidence in what you're doing unless you really understand it, not just to the point that you grasp the impact of what you put into the report, right? It's not just a matter of looking up a CVE, seeing that it's, an unauthenticated RCE, that's a big deal. And, this is what they got to do to fix it, right? You need to be able to take that a step farther, because when they ask, and sometimes it will happen, being able to roll with the punches, as they say, and answer those questions and get the conversation back on track is sometimes really, really important, because a lot of times these will be scheduled for like an hour. And sometimes you'll have those folks who want to spend 25 minutes on page 7, and we got 81 pages to go. So being able to quickly address their main concerns, even if they don't really tell you what their main concerns are, is a talent that is going to take time to develop, but it's super important. So it all comes back to what Christian was talking about at the beginning, which is knowing your audience. So we have a lot of good documentation on that to check out, but it's one of those things that it's only going to come with time and with practice and with doing it. You can't really, you can't get that from a video series. You can't get that from reading a book or anything like that. You can learn the technicals that way a little bit, but that's the sort of thing that you can't practice presentation or practice how your reports are going to be received by proxy. And that makes it a little bit challenging.
So fantastic. No, Dennis, was there any additional items you wanted to add?
As far as that goes, I don't think so. The only thing I would add on is that I concur with Travis's thought. Coming into this position, previously did a lot of sysadmin work, and it doesn't really, even knowing it doesn't prepare you for technical writing. It takes a while to master. You have to get an idea of not only how to present it, to be visually, aesthetically pleasing in some cases, like, you know, the overlaying images, because let's be honest, looks nice, people like it even more. But also as far as how to write it in a technically, I want to say technically descriptive or technically competent manner without going, you know, crazy over the top, but enough that the team can remediate it. There's a balance to be had with that. Also, the most fun clients are the ones that spend time like 30 minutes on page 7, especially when page 7, the exploit on page 7, we should downgrade it to like an informational or remove it entirely. Those are the fun clients.
We had that experience today.
Fantastic. It doesn't look like we have any other big questions in here. Is that right? Okay. So I posted in the chat, by the way, just so everyone knows. So Travis and myself are going to be on the Cybercrime Junkies podcast this Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It would be fantastic if folks could join us. We're going to have some really cool things to share, additional resources and content. You guys know us for creating a lot of fantastic open source content that's not tied to like, hey, buy my thing, buy this, here's my ads here. We don't have any of that. We're not interested in that. We have full-time jobs. We make good, you know, salaries here, that kind of stuff. We just want to put good into the world, right? You guys know us really well for the information security encyclopedia that I created, that also so many fantastic people like Travis and Dennis have contributed to and helped build, right? And so we're going to have a lot of other awesome content that we're going to be sharing with you guys just like that quite soon, right on that podcast. And then on top of that, Travis, to the technical writing stuff, I think I'm going to have to follow up with Jason Connor on our team, who has provided us a lot of great content that he found in Udemy. I'll have to put those.
It's in the one I wrote on report writing.
Oh, okay, cool. I was about to say, I'll make sure that that's incorporated into the encyclopedia as well. So that being said, team, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We hope everyone has a fantastic night now. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.